Quick question, why do people care so much about data? We heard it mentioned early on day one of WFS Africa, and it's continued as a theme. Big data, smart data, open data, all sorts of data, because, well, data is information, information can turn into knowledge, and knowledge ultimately, as the saying goes, means power. And when you get data about the exact people that you are trying so desperately to reach and connect with and engage, it is such a precious commodity. And first-party data is huge in football, particularly sports in general, especially football, because football clubs and federations, that's why they put a lot into their own owned and operated platforms, like their website or their OTT offering, because they then own that first-party data. Whereas if you have to go to a Twitter or a YouTube or an Instagram, it's not yours. It can be expensive to try and acquire it. But the most important thing about data is that word knowledge that I mentioned before. And sometimes that's not that measurable or specific. It's a tonal thing. It can be qualitative rather than quantitative. And sometimes the variations in knowledge come because of the demographics of the audience you're speaking to. So age, gender, background, socioeconomic status, location, all sorts of things. And that's where the other part comes in, allied with knowledge, judgment, intuition, and armed with all the possible data and information, making that right call over and over and over again. And if you do that, the chances are that you'll be pretty close to knowing your audience, in this case, the African football fan. And that way you can find the right way to give them what they want and for them to stay with you every step of the way. And that is very much what success looks like. But what are the nuances of this situation here in Africa and in African football? Again, the most obvious comparison is Europe, as it always is. You look at the nearest continent, what are they doing there? What similarities exist in how this is handled, but where also can Africa be so very distinct, very individual, very unique? I'm looking forward to, once again, as I've been all the way through, looking to learn a lot in this next session. So let's welcome our speakers on stage. The Managing Director at IMG here, Robyn Cox. Director at JDR Consulting, Steve Kapeluschnik. Strategy Director at Jackson Group, Kelvin Twissa. And chairing the conversation, Senior Sports Reporter at SABC Sport, Veklile Mnyandu. Please welcome them once again on stage. Thank you very much indeed, guys. This is, the penultimate session on stage. We're looking forward to what you guys have to say. Thank you very much indeed for being here. Veklile, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Veklile Mnyandu is my name. I'm the sports reporter at the SABC Sport. Also the chairperson of the South African Football Journalists Association. But all of us in football, we all consider ourselves as fans long before anything. And I think right here from Nguvu Moja and Tumia Wananchi in East Africa, in Tanzania, I've also been there, right in the middle of COVID. That's where I was in 2010. Very interesting, I should say, the experience that I had in Tanzania at the time. But I think this understanding of a football fan, it's something that all the brands we all agree that they ought to do long before they commit to the game, in terms of what is your ideal a football fan. As I start with you, Kelvin, on this matter.
I think I'll speak more from sub-Saharan context, because it depends on where you are. But for countries like Tanzania, Kenya, Zambia, it cuts across all income levels. It is skewed to male, but then next to religion. So I could be a Christian, a Muslim, or believe in tradition. The next thing that I have strong belief and I'm highly connected to will be a club. And there are about 3 layers from my perspective. I see that people are connected to the local area they live. So I could be from Mbeya, so Mbeya City is my team. But since I live in the major city with Dar es Salaam, one of the clubs, like Yanga, could be a club that I'm affiliated to. And it's easier to engage with Yanga as my Tanzania team or my regional team, even when they participate in the region. But also from there, we see that a lot of people will skip from that to go to the European leagues, either EPL or La Liga, etc., with EPL taking the most of it. And it depends on the level of engagement I get, where I can consume the sport, how far I understand the players, and how much I can really get that attachment to an always-on engagement. Technology plays a big role. in terms of how people interact. Not everybody goes on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, but they do have local WhatsApp groups that are actually named according to the team they like, both local as well as the other one. They can be engaged in multiple activities. We call them border riders, who are a huge part of the ecosystem in Tanzania. These are guys who give motorcycle rides, they transport mean, apart from the small taxis and everything else, to the traders and everyone else. And if you go to a typical stadium experience, not everybody can go to the stadium, so it becomes quite critical for that fan to be able to access the team through many channels throughout the time of the season, and especially more excitement when they're able to qualify for the international one. So it is a conversation that's never off as the league progresses. The family has that conversation. At church, there'll be that conversation. Recently, my mother was at a church fundraising, and she was shocked when the MC said something she didn't understand. The MC called Nguvu Moja, and a whole bunch of people woke up and started screaming, and they were dancing and chanting. And then they called the other team, and the same happened. And this was within a church after the Mass on a Sunday where they were doing a fundraising. So it is a culture, it is a religion, it is part of us, it is part of who we are. It doesn't discriminate against age, sex, and you can see that in a single family, the typical fan will start with the father, and he can be on one team or another. The mother can be different from that. And then the kids will develop based on their friendship, how they go to school, who they engage with. They will end up picking a team. At the local level, I think it can be more common, but at the national level, especially in the Premier League, with a reference of Kenya or Tanzania, you're either Gor Mahia AFC, or you're Yanga or Simba. You could be a Red Arrows fan or TP Mazembe, whichever one, depending on where you are. And that becomes your second religion that you're obsessed with. When they win, you're happy. When they're sad, you cry, and it becomes part of our daily life.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know, with me growing up in the Eastern Cape, back in the days, Mthatha Bushbucks was always the team, because the club also introduced us to professional football, even as young reporters growing up. But you've long been in this space, Stephen, not just exposed to local football here in South Africa, and even in terms of most of the areas where you've conducted deals as well. Traveling around, what would you picture as your ideal African football fan?
Thanks, Veklile, and good afternoon to everybody. I think, for me, the fan is the spiritual owner of the club. He or she feels that it's their club, that they're the boss, that they own it. As Kelvin said, when they win, they celebrate. When they lose, they commiserate. And it's a deeply loyal and emotional relationship between the fan and the club. So it can be generational. You know, when one family member decides, I've had enough, I'm moving, it's a huge discussion, it's a huge debate. You talk about Bushbucks. I mean, I remember the Pasia family. Yeah. They put so much energy into that club, and Mercedes-Benz would sponsor them back in the day. I'm talking about 15 years ago or something. And the whole community, they were fans, but they felt that they owned the club. So when you went there, they felt like it was their club. And that's why I say that they are the spiritual owners of the club, in a sense.
A very good point that you've mentioned there, Stephen, because when Mercedes-Benz started to sponsor the club, I think it was in the early 2000s, Bushbucks had to move. They moved from Mthatha to East London because the business plant of Mercedes-Benz was based in East London. So for them, there had to be that proximity. And on a commercial angle in this space, when we talk about it now, in terms of the base, because we've seen a lot of also club displacements here in the country. When I'm talking about this one, Robyn, how important is that proximity between the commercial brands that the clubs are aligned to, so that they have this common language that they have and selling a single message to the fan?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me today. It's very important for your brand alignment to match up. I mean, if your key sponsor doesn't have the same ideals and visions and objectives as you do, then you guys are working at cross purposes. So you want to be targeting the same kind of fan, the same engaging with the same level of people. You want to ensure that your messaging is reaching the club fans, but also the people that you're trying, your target market. And therefore, if you're going to engage with a brand, can't just be about the money. I mean, money is obviously important, but at the end of the day, the fan, as Steve mentioned, they have the ownership of that brand. They're the ones who are going to buy the products of your sponsors. They're the ones who are going to support your team. They're the ones who are going to buy the tickets. So you need to be addressing them as well as just like a revenue generator, just, putting the game out there. It's like understanding who your target market is, both from a football federation as well as a brand. And that's very, very key. Before you go out into the market just going for the top dollar, understand what the product is that you're trying to create and what you're trying to sell and who you're trying to reach.
And in your experience, having dealt with African football, is that really happening in terms of understanding what the African football fan wants?
I think in some countries it's done better than others, but on the whole, there's definitely a lack of understanding your fan and your target market. And I think a lot of the federations are unfortunately in a situation where they might not be in the position to be able to do the research, to understand, to have the funds to generate that kind of information. And so therefore they're just doing what's required of them without actually realizing that by doing that they're actually selling themselves short. And therefore there needs to be a proper understanding of what is the product, because your fans aren't going to just engage because you got a match on the field. Your fans are going to engage because of that emotional link, because they're being challenged, because they're being included, and they feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves. And therefore, to get to that point, you need to ensure that you actually know who you're targeting and what you're trying to achieve.
Which leads me to something that I've seen before happening, and in fact, I see it more with other sporting codes, because I've covered cricket before. There's something that I like, Stephen, and where you get to see the players, especially maybe the players who are not part of the match day squad on that day, going out to sign autographs for the fans, or even to be in an area where they can easily engage the fans. And that understanding between the player and the fan is always easy, but I've not seen it a lot in football.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there's a lot more that can be done. If you look at the levels of engagement in Europe between the players and the fans, it's much, much higher. In South Africa, we do it, but we could do more, because ultimately the player brings the fan to the club. And if you speak about football with any fan, he'll talk about the players when he talks about the club. The two are linked. So, I feel like the fans in South Africa are getting a little bit of a raw deal. I think we can do a lot more. There are some reasons for it that are outside of our control. Socio-political, economic reasons. For example, our data is very expensive in South Africa compared to data charges all around the world. And that brings the content to the fan. So that's, on that point, there's nothing really the club or the league can do. But on issues around engaging in communities, going to schools, going to hospitals, going to disadvantaged people, having clinics, there's so much more that can be done.
Very good point that you're raising there, because in as much as we're talking about a digital era where most of the things are also done on the digital space, but maybe coming from a background where I'm working for a state broadcaster, we're dealing with more traditional media who are on the ground, and you find that most of the people who are going to pack FNB Stadium, or who are going to be at Moses Mabhida, or who will go to Herigwala, those are people who will be listening to your Ukozi. Those are people who will just be there on the ground without the digital influence, which I feel that sometimes as we talk more about the digital space, we tend to ignore that most of the people who are attending matches are your traditionalists.
I agree with you on that one. When we talk about digital, I think it's also important to kind of quantify depending on which part of Africa you are. South Africa has one of the highest penetrations in terms of mobile phones. Cost is still a factor. But if you go to the rest of Africa, focusing on sub-Saharan Africa, there's still the issue of what kind of device people are using. One of the biggest challenges we face at the moment is how do we convert 75 to 80% of people who are not on 4G. Therefore, they cannot have the full 360 experience of downloading an app and enjoying such a... But then there's alternative ways to engage a fan. Radio still is one of the leading medias that people consume heavily. They can follow a game while they continue with other work. If I'm a carpenter or if I'm an Uber driver or a motorcycle rider, I'm able to listen to radio as I go about, and they follow beyond that. There's a radio station in Tanzania, for example, that was able to become one of the top main city radios simply by having a 4-hour programming from noon to 4 p.m., going deeper into sports because the demand was there. I want to hear more about the players. I want to hear more about what's going on around the world. And this is a fact. What the fan wants is they want information. How they get it is a very interesting way. The ecosystem they've built is that allows them to learn. I think for those who have smartphones, they don't consume it as it happens necessarily, but they do have groups. So if I am in Kenya, I'll have a Gor Mahia fan where these are people I know, and there's always one who will download, but then they throw it in the group. So whenever I have my data, I'll download and I'll share. They'll carry on the conversation. Twitter, you can see that conversation ongoing as well. Instagram as well as Facebook play quite a huge part, and now Telegram picks up the same. As a fan, the biggest thirst they have is engaging with the team on a 365-day cycle. They want to know what's happening, when we're going, what's happening with the coach, what's happening with the player. It's a relationship. So the more information is built, and then that is linked to the club, it is what you call a community. So Team Yonanchi, typically as we speak about Yanga, it is that Yanga community that makes Yanga very, very strong. Not everybody will come to the stadium, but they are highly engaged. And when given an opportunity to engage with the club, then they definitely do so, which creates a unique audience that now partners can come in and extract value. How do you come in? It depends on what product you have. You rightfully mentioned it, Robyn. The product that you're selling has to have relevance. You know, we've seen, like, in Formula One, where you have a cigarette brand on it. I mean, like, Formula One, high-performance engine, human endurance, and then what does it have to do with cigarette? It's there. They've modified it. But then when it comes to football, it's part of our life. So whether it's drinking water, a telecom product, or a banking services, it's not just about being a banking service. It's about me as a different level in my life where I am, different incomes. How does this brand make my life better? How do I appreciate my club for bringing me this product so that without thinking too hard, of course the product has to deliver, I can come in and say, you know what, this is a match made in heaven. One of the examples I think I can give, we are talking about fans being able to have a piece of the club.
Yeah.
I'm going to be biased and talk about Yanga. There are two special partnerships. Azam is a broadcaster in Tanzania who does both satellite as well as other channels for distribution. They have an amazing app that works. And they broadcast almost all the games in the Premier League. So you can follow all the games real time. They're able to build quite a unique ecosystem, but they also became a club sponsor. And they created a channel specific for Yanga fans to get unique behind-the-scene content. And this is something that has allowed more people to see the players, to understand who they are, to get those behind-the-scene content as well. Now, the other partnership that works is GSM Sports. They came in with a strong retail distribution, and now 500,000 kits, even more, are sold just before the season starts. So for GSM Sports, it makes sense to sponsor Yanga as well be their distribution partner because an ecosystem exists. Now when you walk around on Yanga Day, which is a pre-season match, everybody at the stadium, 60,000 people, are wearing the season's kit.
Very interesting, very interesting. In fact, we'll come back to that because at some stage I was even confused when I got there because I thought GSM were owning the team.
No.
But they actually, they were the sponsors. And I want to come to this one, yes, Stephen, because in a province like here now in KZN, they've got 5 teams. And when you look at, in terms of also the numbers, I think this is in terms of second biggest in terms of numbers in the country, in terms of population, KZN. But it also means that now, this is a situation where the clubs here has got to be very clear in terms of marketing themselves, because there's a lot of competition from just maybe having 2 teams in the top league or 3 teams to 5. And it means that that's got to be a daily job in terms of targeting and having a strategy to engage with their fan base.
Yeah, I think that if you look at a team like Maritzburg United, they've really, in a short time, done an unbelievable job. Play out of Harry Gwala Stadium. If you go there, I mean, I've been there. It's a small stadium, but the stadium's packed.
Friday nights.
Yeah, and it's become like a fortress. Wits did the same thing. I think a big problem in South Africa, and which I touched on before, was we've got these huge stadiums, and you can have 10,000 people at FNB, but it looks empty. Whereas if you have 10,000 people at Harry Gwala, it looks full. And that's about respecting the fan and giving the fan an unbelievable experience. So that's where we can improve. We need to look at ourselves and say, look at what Maritzburg have done and others. Build your fortress. And that's all community-based. Those people that are coming there, they live in Maritzburg, they're coming to the stadium, it's an unbelievable product. The fan wants a product. He also wants engagement, he also wants to be spoken to, he also wants to be respected. It's a very, very difficult thing, and it's a bit of a balancing act because, you always have this issue. Think about Man United, where you've got the Glazers. And the fans hate them. Chelsea just fired their coach, Tommy Tuchel, brought in a new coach. The fans are angry. So you've got to balance the communication between the club and the fan because the fan is your bread and butter. Without the fan, you don't have a club.
Sometimes you also want to see a commercially strong league, but also you want to see a good package, especially when you watch on TV in terms of having the fans. And one area that also impressed me when SuperSport entered into a deal to broadcast the Ethiopian League. You could see, and not just when St. George was playing, but even just other matches. And I'm happy now, today Sundowns has got Nasir, who comes from the Ethiopian League, for a TV package, but also well-attended matches. How long does that go to build this good brand we're talking about?
So, the reality is that for most federations, more than 60% of their revenue comes from that TV deal, right? So when a broadcaster like Azam or SuperSport come in and they're able to put in millions of dollars, what it does do is it then enables the federation or the league to actually start producing a product that is accessible, it's enjoyable, it attracts fans, and it's something that people want to watch. Therefore, you're going to start getting people watching it on TV, and people are going to start coming to the stadium because suddenly now the product is good. Whereas before there might not have been a product, or if there was one, it just wasn't run correctly. And then by having your TV package, yes, it might be exclusive and it might sit on a channel or behind a paywall, but what it is doing is it's actually building that league to enable people to come in and be a part of that league and take ownership of that league and become fans of those teams. And either you go and watch it in the stadium, or you can watch it on television, or you can watch it in pubs. So it is accessible. It might not necessarily always be affordable, but it's accessible. And the reason it needs to be at this stage is that, unfortunately, how the media landscape sits in Africa is our free-to-air broadcasters do not necessarily, generally don't have the same pockets that our pay TV broadcasters have, and therefore those levels of investment can't be the same. So as much as I think everyone would love to have sport fully available to everybody, there is a revenue situation where a business has to be run, and that business is the business of football, of that football league. So it needs to be managed to create this product that everyone can then buy into.
There's a service that I've seen. I think you're talking about Malawi. I don't know, there's someone was talking about Malawi. There's a service that I've seen. I think it's a FIFA Plus. And what FIFA Plus does is that they also show some of the leagues that you don't get to see that are live streamed. And do you think this can go a long way to closing the gap on what we were talking about earlier?
If I can just jump in, your point about Abu Bakr Nasir is a brilliant point. And that just shows something positive in the power of football. So Sundowns go and they sign this 21-year-old from Ethiopia, and there's a huge game, and they're playing against Chiefs, and he scores a wonderful goal. And the next week on TV, you see this whole bunch of Ethiopian fans wearing the Ethiopian national shirt in the stadium, and now they're watching Sundowns. And that's the power of the fan, because, and that's the power and the positivity of bringing in an African player. And then after the game, what happens is the Sundowns supporters are unbelievable, because it's a new thing. You never saw it 5 years ago. They sing and they applaud the team, and then when the coach goes and does his interview, he thanks the fans. So that's just heartwarming to see. I mean, there's a lot wrong, but there's a lot right. So, yeah.
Which would then lead me to what then in driving this commercial message, what becomes the next points? Should Sundowns go to Addis Ababa, go and activate there, just to ride on this good messaging coming out and start to build this new fan base? Because, I mean, if you look at the numbers, I think Ethiopia is the most populous country, or one of the most populous countries on the continent, I think after Nigeria.
Yes.
So this thing of, you don't just limit in terms of activating to your fan base here. You also go to those areas where you know that each and every time Nasir is playing, he's being watched. If it's Onyango, you go and activate in Kampala. It just goes on like that.
I think whenever there's international players in a team, it offers a huge opportunity for any club to be able to market itself across the region and even furthermore across the continent. We have a player, for example, you mentioned Wanyama in Kenya, who was playing for the EPL. Everybody in Kenya became a supporter of that team. We have a player now who plays in Genk, and when he went to play in the EPL, you see, it's crazy. A country like Tanzania, people love Instagram. So you have typical artists, 10 million followers, football players, 1 million, 2 million, quite high. So the club that he went to had like 400,000 followers. But the minute they signed him, Samata, they went up by 300,000 in one day. And this is like shocking to them. They never looked at Africa as a market that follows the EPL, but that's the reality. And we can take a model of looking at what La Liga is doing in the market. They're trying to create value, build partnerships, set up offices across Africa as well. And for clubs that are well established over many years, like Orlando Pirates and the rest, I think the DSTV kind of deal, it opens up a whole new audience for them. And people in Ethiopia did not see live games every day during the league. Now that's a massive opportunity in terms of they can consume the game. I think I go back to my initial point. Access is very important. It's not only important within the country, but also within the continent and beyond, because it boosts a lot of things. You're able to see the talent. You're able to follow the game. You're able to follow the results. You're able to build a relationship with the players. But then the content doesn't end with just seeing the game. It also goes to what kind of content is built around the game, to know the players more as they train, the coaches, what's the thinking. And when you build such a strong ecosystem and you allow the fans to consume that content throughout the day when they want, on demand as it is, then that makes it quite possible for people to follow through. The biggest broadcaster for sports, I think, in Africa is Super Sports. And them carrying the Ethiopian League definitely offers a unique opportunity for talent to be seen across the board. I've seen now this in sub-Saharan Africa, we see players from Burundi playing in Kenya. We see players from Congo playing in Tanzania. We see Tanzanian players who are seen through the broadcast feed being able to be sold in countries like Turkey. Some play in North Africa, which is Africa but fairly disconnected to what we are talking about in terms of sub-Saharan Africa. And in terms of businesses, right? When there is that, for a Pan-African brand, football creates a unique opportunity where you can get presence and people will see you across. Earlier, other speakers talked about it can be the club, but also the players are part of the IP rights that are sold. Maybe not as individuals, but rather 3 players, 4 players, and these are best practices that are done across the world. I don't see why a Samsung or Hisense or whoever who have got into World Cup shouldn't be working with the local leagues to also drive their brand awareness, also trying to convert at the local level. So again, an ecosystem has to be built to allow the fan to engage, and this is a challenge for both the club leadership. Another speaker earlier mentioned something that I always feel very disturbing, where when you open the newspapers, you see more about the leadership of the federation rather than the players, the captain stories. And this is one of those things where we say, if we want to build a business, we cannot build it on an elected or appointed official, rather build it on the talent that's playing on the pitch.
Just briefly on this one, don't go too much on it because it's going to go back to you on what you've just mentioned. I think there's a football administrator I respect a lot. He's here, I won't mention his name. Way back, he went to Kenya, and this is your region. And I remember him saying to me, he had to fight with Kenyan football officials because they wanted to start a football match at 1 o'clock. And the scheduled time, normal scheduled time, I think it was just after 3, but now they didn't want to play that game at 3 because it's clashing with an EPL game. Now, what message is that sending into a football fan if this FA or this national league is trying to alter its kickoff times and giving respect to another league?
I think it's very important to be proud of the product that we have.
Absolutely.
It is very important to understand that globally there's thousands of games being played every day. But as we build the interest of football, I say I got interested in football when I was in primary school, and we'll say, are you Yanga or Simba? And so one group goes on one side and another goes. So even if you're not interested, all of a sudden now, based on the friends you have, you either have to be Kaizer Chiefs or Orlando Pirates, because that's how you split when you're done. You have to pick a side. And then from there you grow into it over time. But then when you are now in 2022, and then a decision is made, not for you as a fan, for someone to say, no, this game should not be available. I think we should really put the fan front and center of the whole experience around the game. At the end of the day, the rights for the EPL were paid for somewhere. They are done. That money doesn't come to the federation. But the league that we're building locally, whether it's in Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, or Zambia, it needs the funding to develop it and go further. And for us to attract the business, viewing a game at 12, it doesn't make any sense. People are busy with their life trying to do what they do to earn their living.
The weather.
The weather can be, also it's very, very hot. I mean, in Tanzania, you cannot play a game at 12. But even in Kenya, depending on what time of year it is. So it's very important to also make it accessible. I go back again now, props to the federation working with Azam. They've put lights, so games are on at 7 p.m. So you can sit in a pub on any given day and you are able to watch a game that is played in either Zanzibar or Dodoma. Dodoma, which is the capital city, also has a stadium. There's a team there called Dodoma FC. The games are played at night. So that's changing the landscape. You are giving people more access to the game. And what's important is you're giving more value to the sponsors. The TV audience at 12 is quite small, irregardless. But the TV audience at 6 or 4 p.m. or 8 p.m. becomes much higher, so that you can package, whether it's the in-stadium branding, television broadcast that is happening in terms of the sports, the squeeze backs, etc. And then going beyond that, you can also pull the additional activations where you can look at digital. How do you redistribute the content online through your channels, other partners, etc., which it gives additional reach for the brands, but most importantly, more access to the fans.
Now, there's different forms of broadcasting. Today at SABC Sport, we've launched an OTT program. And when I look at it, because I work more also on the production side, and one of the exciting programs that I've been part of is working with the Hollywood Bets Super League. That is, and we don't see it a lot happening in other countries. It's women's football guaranteed at least 2 to 3 matches every weekend. Now, okay, maybe it was one game on national TV, but the OTT, it means that people will be able to access those matches just in their own time. But most importantly, we've seen CAF, next year they are introducing the CAF Super League, where it's standard in terms of the club licensing regulations that each and every club that participates there must have they must have a women's team, or they must be aligned to a women's team. From a strategy, because most of what we're talking about here is men's football in terms of the approach and talking to the fan. So is this something that now the clubs must also start to keep it in their mind to say, when we talk about what kind of a fan, this is both for women's football and men's football?
Absolutely. I mean, we've all seen the spike in interest in women's football. America winning the world, or their participation in the World Cup, England and the stadiums, 96 million people watching on TV, coming into the stadium. So there is a massive growth of fans, and they're not just women, they're football fans. And I think that's very important, is the fact that women's football needs to be brought up to the level that men's football is, because it's still a football product. And therefore, by engaging with the different clubs to ensure that they have women's teams as well, they need to invest the same amounts of money so that they can deliver the same product, so that what they're delivering is football, not men's football or women's football. They're delivering a product to the football fan. And that's why it's great to see that all the big federations, the leagues, they're all starting to bring women's teams in. It's whether or not they're played at the same time and given the same amount of airtime. That's so important in order to make the women's sport become part of football and not just be, the women's team's playing now. You need it to be football, no differentiation. And, so I think this is a very good move. And
in South Africa today, we have 16 teams in our Premier League. Of those 16, only 2 have women's teams. It's unacceptable. How can you create women fans of the women's game, if you've only got 2 of your teams have women's football? So these are the things that we have to work on, and these things should definitely be compulsory. If you want to have a team in the league, you need to have a women's team. End of story.
100%. In fact, there's a research paper that I've just submitted in one of the courses that I was doing that talks exactly to that. But it also talks more about our role as the media, the disparity in the coverage of the game. How is it also affecting the gender parity? But that is a story for another day. We are talking about, there used to be 3 before teams, and that was, I think Swallows at some stage also had a women's team. But Celtic, now that club has moved to here, Royal AM. But what I'm trying to say is there's a football fan, one of the most popular football fans, who has been displaced. And he was the symbol of football fans on the continent in 2019. I remember we were covering the AFCON. Everyone read about his trip. Rob was here earlier on. He was very much involved in that, in Botha. But Botha also comes from a displaced or a non-existent club. So in terms of that, Stephen, you've been in the space, in terms of this selling and buying and how it also affects the football market, because you are also having brands that would have aligned with some of these clubs because of their fan base, and then in just one transaction, that whole fan base is gone.
Yeah, it's a brilliant point. Absolutely. I mean, we had, you would go to Cesar Ramaburu and watch Bloemfontein Celtic play. on a Wednesday afternoon at 4:30 packed. You would go to Wits on a Friday night packed. Wits was, I think, 99 years old. It was a 99-year-old club that got sold. There's no more Wits. So where are those fans? You had multi-generational fans that supported the club. The club's gone. So, you know, it goes down to respecting the fan also, because players are important, fans are important, everybody's important. So it's it's a big, big problem. I mean, poor Botha's looking for a club to support, I suppose. I don't know where he is, but he's looking for a club.
Well, I've seen him, but I always see him, he goes with a club that is playing against the big club so that he can be visible, because when he's with the big club, the visibility will not be the same. But Kelvin, there's something that I've seen, and I will not say to me it looked across as deliberate when I went to the Kariak Derby, but I've also seen it in North Africa, especially with Al Ali and also with Raja. When Al Ali, there used to be fans around it. The activating around the stadium, even here at home, I don't see it a lot, but it impressed me in East Africa to see it happening, even though I didn't see the involvements of the clubs, but it was just other brands around the game doing it.
When you have the Derby, which is, for Tanzania example, and we're talking about the Kariakoo Derby, which is Yanga versus Simba. Both clubs are from Dar es Salaam. Both started in the 30s. They were part of the they were part of the whole movement for independence. The history is rich, but the advancement in technology, communication, and opportunities for engagement has changed how things happen. So typically at the kickoff of the season, you have Yanga Simba Day, which, and then the first game which you experience, which was actually a Kariakoo Derby, is the most interesting one. It is not done by the fans. It is done by the clubs themselves. One of the most critical things I think they've learned over the years is that it's very important to quantify the number of fans that you have. So today, Yanga and Simba can easily say that, you know, we are one of the biggest clubs in terms of online media following, 2, 3 million, 4 million fans that are following online. But I was privy to look under it and see that they have huge engagements, you know, 10 million visitors unique just on Instagram on one site, serving 50 million impressions online. This is Yanga statistics, and now growing even beyond that. But that is one aspect. Now, how do you bring it on the ground? The whole derby becomes like a month-long activation. They bring in media partners on radio, they start talking about it. They bring in vote for your favorite team. You can do like a lotto type of SMS and see who raises more money than the other club. But then we have also seen, especially this year, where other guys are coming in and saying, listen, let's activate just for the derby. And as long as it does not infringe with other rights, then they are able to do their on-ground activation. So it doesn't bother with the perimeter balls necessarily, but outside and around the stadium, they're able to do setup.
Yeah, but there's a question that Stephen kept on asking you. Let's leave the derby beyond the derby in terms of the other teams.
I think I'll answer this question by saying it's a challenge. Going back to our agenda, what does football need to know to grow? I think there are about 3 sides that need to know a few things for us to get the derby experience across all games. In terms of the federations under the government guidance, invest more on infrastructure based on the size of the base. So I don't expect 60,000 fans in Bear, but 10,000 stadium is fair. On the governance, making sure everything is in place. Yeah. We run making sure that the partners who come on board, they are protected. I think one of the biggest challenges I've had in my previous career as a sponsor was rights being infringed by someone. You know, you're Vodacom, and then somebody brings another telco operator who just does an activation around you. That partnership should be so strong, and someone on the other side of the fence should be able to take care of you. Having worked with global partners like Everton, they actually have a whole commercial department, rights management. Your IP is never a problem. In fact, they ask you of ways where they can unpack. So it's important for the clubs to understand that. But at the end of the day, if there is the right stadium, if the rights are being taken care of and the partners are bringing in money, now we bring in the fan. How do we keep the fan always engaged, irregardless? Because front, right, and center, the fan is what value that the club has. And the fan is not an individual, it's a community. So for us to bring money into football, that community has to be the focal, but some basic things have to be laid out to move forward.
Just a quick wrap-up, Robyn, now. You know, I was encouraged yesterday, I was doing an interview to also find out that Zambia, inspired by what their neighbors and brothers and sisters in South Africa have done in terms of having highly successful commercial PSL, which is a special member to SAFA, and now Zambia is also following that route. And I think this becomes, for the Zambian Super League or the professional league, this discussion becomes key to them. What would be your advice to them as they start this new era, but doing things the right way from what we're talking about?
Focus on your fan, understand your community and understand your target market, because those are the people that are ultimately going to create the product that you are wanting to deliver.
And in terms of accessibility, that we're talking about here, Stephen, because accessibility for the fans, especially of the venue, becomes key.
Yeah, I think accessibility is important, but I think, I think data is super important. But in South Africa, for example, the SABC's got 19 radio stations, and they are they're the most important because they are who's talking to a fan now. So we can go back to Europe and we can look at all of that, but we've got to look at the reality on our ground. And I think radio has been unbelievable. They talk to millions of fans every day, all over Africa for that matter. And I think we should applaud them and focus on that a little bit more.
No, when you talk radio, you're talking my language. More than 20 years in the business, and radio, that's where I started, and that's where I've been. And I think in as much as we've got these challenges, but also at the same time, especially from a South African perspective, we've seen most of our matches, especially big matches, being sold out. And you've also seen decent crowd, even outside matches that involve the big three as well, which is something that is encouraging. And we hope that when the new Super League kicks off next season, I see that it could be going to Rwanda. Yeah. It will be played in front of big stands, big crowds as well.
Absolutely.
We thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We've come to the end of our penultimate session. Ladies and gents, please make your way off the stage to your left. Very much appreciative. Thank you, Veklile. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, very sort of, again, I think that what I find with all of these sessions is that there's always something you can kind of refer to, and there are some real basic learnings that we can all understand. Quite simply, respect for the fan. Without fans, football is nothing. Absolutely nothing. It doesn't matter how many World Cups and Champions Leagues and Women's World Cups, all of that we stage. If we don't consider our fan in every decision we make, we might as well just take our ball home and forget about it. And Robyn's quotes about understanding, again, what your product is, what you're trying to sell, who you're trying to reach. It's real, simple, but crucial, absolutely pivotal stuff. And yeah, again, like the uniqueness of Africa, which I've come to and learned to appreciate. Alternative ways to engage fans other than with fast internet. Of course, we talk about the advent of 4G, 5G, all the tech innovations that you like, but quite simply, as we were hearing from Kelvin, radio is big in Africa and it reaches to the deepest regions, and today the fan wants information, and how they get it is a very interesting case. And the ecosystem they've built is what allows them to learn. So maybe you have to consider things in a different way. You have to, not necessarily be driven by the latest fad. We had a session on Web 3.0. We were talking about NFTs, about crypto, and about the metaverse. Maybe we have to just look at things in a different way over here.